For all of the criticisms that there have been of the Qur'an and all the speculations there have been regarding the compilation of the Qur'an within Western scholarship, some which say that the Qur'an actually began earlier than the Muslims say it began, or some which say that the whole history of it actually went another 200 years after the time of the Prophet Muhammad. None of those are actually grounded in studies of the available manuscripts. As more and more manuscripts have become available, we've been able to confirm with greater and greater accuracy, scientifically, as empirically as one can, that the story that the Muslims have of the compilation of the Qur'an is, for the most part, accurate. As Karl Ernst has said, it is a better explanation of the data that we have available to us than any other theory that anyone has proposed. The most recent manuscript that was found, and the earliest manuscript of the Qur'an ever to be found, are the ones that were found in Sana'a, in Yemen, in the old mosque in Sana'a. And there was a lot of speculation when those manuscripts were first found. In fact, there was an article in the Atlantic Monthly about how this was going to tell us new things about the history of the Qur'an. Well, nobody had studied them at that point. This was just speculation. Now they've been studied, not all of them, but at least one folio has undergone rigorous analysis. And that rigorous analysis has demonstrated through carbon dating, one, that that manuscript does come at about the time when Muslims say the Qur'an was compiled. But then there's even an underscript of the Qur'an that's shown, that's on the parchment. What happens is, in the old days, when you used parchment, if you wanted to write something new on it, you didn't throw out the parchment because it was so expensive. You would erase what was on there, and then you would write something new. Now, the inks were also partially metal-based. So through infrared photography, we can actually get an image of what that Arabic script was that was on that parchment before the Qur'an as we know it was written on that parchment. That infrared photography has shown us that the surahs as we know them were there and intact. Furthermore, they even show that the slight variations that are in the text are ones that Muslims have attested. There wasn't anything that one could call a variant that Muslims had not attested was a variant of the Qur'an that had been transmitted by some Muslims. Now the other thing is, if you think about it, if somebody were to make up a history of the text, you wouldn't have made it up the way that Muslims have the history written down. You would have said, well, it was written at this time, and then it was put down under the time of the Prophet Muhammad, and alhamdulillah, that was that. You wouldn't say, well, first, after he died, they didn't have it written down. Then under the Caliphate of Abu Bakr, it was written in one form, and then a few years later, around the year 650, it was put down in another compilation, and this was the final compilation. Nobody would make up that story. So even there, it is really an act of distrust on the part of the Orientalists to try to find different histories, A, than what the Muslims first accounted for, and B, what the manuscripts actually tell us.
Transmitted to us in our modern copies. It has reached us in our modern copies. And then on top of that, Western scholars, Western non-Muslim scholars are saying Muslims have exactly the same Qur'an Muhammad taught to his companions, and then they delivered it to posterity.
Mm-hmm.
What more do you need? Physical copies, then a tradition to back it, how to read it, and then modern Christian, non-Christian, non-Muslim scholars confirming its veracity. Then anyone who questions it after that is either confused or a liar. So let's go to the clip of Dr. Yasir Qadhi.
This is why people like David would need to fix up, bro, honestly. And I just had to say that some people are just clowns, bro. Honestly, literally clowns.
We don't engage with people like that because they are outright liars. I'm not talking about Dr. Yasir Qadhi, by the way. He mentioned, Brother Imran mentioned a name. So in case people think that the picture came up and I'm talking about him.
No, that was no time.
Dr. Yasir Qadhi, I think he should have been more clear on this issue. He confused a lot of people with some vague statements he made. Either he should not have indulged in this topic in this particular interview. If he chose to indulge, then he should have gone into more details, clarifying the muhkamat. The muhkamat means established matters, what we talked about in this particular live stream. We talked about established matters in this live stream, right? We talked about them. What is established? This is what's established. So if you were to ask me, if you gave me a blank codex, a blank copy, for example, a blank notebook.
Yeah.
If you gave me a blank notebook and asked me to write the Quran in it, what would I write in it? If you ask me that question, I would tell you, I would write this. Bring it back on the screen.
What, the video?
No, the page. The page.
1 second, bro. Let me just pop it up. Here we go.
If you ask me this question today, what would you write on a blank notebook if we were asked to write the Quran on that blank notebook? I would write exactly this.
Yeah,
I would write this.
This is what was given. This was what came.
And why I would write that? Because this is exactly what's here, from page 1 to the page last. So if you go to IslamicAwareness.org, there is a list of Qur'ans from the 1st century. We have the entirety of the Qur'an, from the 1st century. The entire Qur'an, we have it from the 1st century. Okay, in different libraries. Okay, we even have complete copies. The Husseini Mosque manuscript, which is from the 1st century in Cairo. Okay, Husseini Mosque manuscript is from the 1st century of Islam. It's in Cairo. It is 99% complete. The complete text of the Quran. Only first 2 or 3 pages are missing. Surah Al-Fatiha and maybe the very early verses of Surah Baqarah are missing. The rest of the Quran is there. Husseini Mosque manuscript. Allahu Akbar. So if someone asked me, what would you write on a blank copy, a blank notebook, if you were asked to write the Quran, I would write exactly that manuscript,
and that
which is exactly the same as what we read at home today. So why are Christian missionaries going on a victory parade? Let's see what Yasir Qadhi said and what he was talking about.
Okay, 1 second.
The crisis was very simple. Traditional understandings of Ahruf al-Qira'at cannot answer some of these pressing questions that are now being poked by our people outside of, by our academics, by their academics outside of the faith tradition.
Pause, please.
Yep, done.
Here, Dr. Yasir Qadhi is saying that the traditional narrative about Ahruf and their relationship to the Qira'at. Ahruf, those 7 modes of the Quran that were read, okay, in the fluid form before the Uthmanic standardization, their reality, those modes and their reality, and how it affects the later reading of the Quran. He's not talking about the physical copies of the Quran. Let me repeat that. Dr. Yasir Qadhi is not talking about the physical copies of the Quran from the 1st century. He's talking about the reading. He's talking about the relationship of the actual reality of those 7 modes of the Quran, how they were read then, and how the Quran was read post-Uthmanic recension, okay, and their relationship. This is what he's talking about, that Western academics are raising questions about it, okay, and they're not getting answers, okay. Just because they're not getting answers does not mean the Quran is not preserved. The Quran is preserved. As we showed you the text, the physical copy from the life of the Prophet and his companions. The Quran is there, the text is there. The debate is about how it is read in those 10 qira'at and how those 10 qira'at relate to the readings of the Quran before the standardization of Uthman. Is that clear?
Yep.
This is exactly what Dr. Yasir Qadhi is talking about. And I wish he could have clarified more. if he had to mention it, if he had to talk about it, he should have gone into more detail to clarify his position. Okay, and I hope he can come out and clarify his position in more detail. Otherwise, he leaves people confused about his position. People will attack him, Muslims and non-Muslims. Non-Muslims will use his vague, ambiguous statements because he's not clearly explaining what he's talking about. I know what he's talking about. I understand what he's talking about, but the masses out there, the Muslims and non-Muslims, do not understand what he's talking about. He needs to come out and he needs to clarify as to what he was talking about. Okay, because missionaries and Islamophobes and Islam haters are using his statements to claim that the Quran is not preserved. Look, a scholar of Islam is saying this. Look, this scholar has written a book on the Quran and he's confused about the Quran. He's not confused. He stated clearly that the Quran, as in the physical copies, is exactly what we read today from the 1st century, right? He's talking about the qira'at, the pronunciation, the reading, the oral delivery of the Quran, how it relates to the pre-Uthmanic reality of the text.
Right.
This is what he's talking about.
Okay,
this is a very academic question, which academics are discussing. He's talking about that. Okay. And he doesn't need to indulge in this. I would advise Dr. Yasir Qadhi to stop indulging in this, because this is not his field. He's not an authority to say. I mean, when he wrote his book, Introduction to the Quranic Sciences, he was a graduate student from Medina University. Okay, he was in his early 20s. He was a student. Okay, I don't know what his exact qualification in the Quran is. What he needs to do, he needs to delegate this task to the Ahlul Quran. He needs to delegate the task to the Ahlul Quran, to the Qur'an, to the masters of the Quran, people who have done PhDs in the Qira'at and they have mastered the transmission of the Quran. He needs to delegate to them, right? Instead of taking it upon himself, talking about the Qira'at and Ahruf and how they correlate and how they relate to each other. Okay, this is my opinion. This is my advice to him as a brother. Okay, I would advise him to avoid making statements that are vague. If you have to make statements, then do lengthy programs like the one we did today and explain your position so people are not left in doubt, because there are people out there, they make all sorts of things, okay, from statements. So it was very unwise, I would say, of Brother Muhammad Hijab and Dr. Qadhi to discuss this in such a brief way and move on. Okay, they should not, leave people confused. They must make things clear. Let's go back to the.
So let me ask you, I want to get clarity here. So so you're saying that the point that was made, it was about discussion about how the ahruf relate to the qira'at that we have.
Yes.
But when it comes
not about the text.
Yes.
The text of the Quran is there from the 1st century.
Yeah.
We just read it. We read it today.
So now, but tell me one thing. When it comes to, because I think this was mentioned, when it comes to the reading Hafs or Warsh, when we read Hafs and Warsh, this is what was given to us by the Prophet ﷺ.
You are reading Hafs and Warsh from the same Mus'haf, from the same text. As I explained, Hafs, Warsh, Qalun, Duri, Ibn Kathir, all of these different styles of readings are based upon exactly that text you see on the screen. Exactly that text you see on the screen. Okay, Hafs is not different Quran, Warsh is not different Quran. Okay, Qalun or Duri or other readings are not different Qur'ans. They are one text being read slightly differently.
And all of those different readings are authentically preserved.
Transmitted. All of those pronunciations, all of those variants, all of those slight variants are directly traceable back to the Prophet. And this is where the scholars have this opinion that they actually originate in the ahruf, those 7 modes.
Got you.
So these slight variations of readings of the same text of the Quran, which we saw on the screen from the 1st century, originate in those 7 modes. They originate from those 7 modes. This is one of the opinions. Okay, to clarify, this is one of the opinions. And scholars have many other opinions on the nature of ahruf and their relation to the Qira'at. Okay, and classical scholars have written books on this. Okay, Al-Jazari, for example. There is a book by Imam Al-Jazari. Okay, and there is a book, it's a brief book on this issue. Al-Itqan fi Ulum al-Qur'an by Imam Suyuti, he discusses these matters. Okay, he gives some of the opinions, and there are many books written by other scholars explaining the nature of ahruf and the qira'at, okay, and their relationship with each other. Okay, so let's play the clip again and see what Dr. Qadhi has to say.
Muslim environment, there's always some respect that we have for the Quran. We should. In a Muslim environment, we'll press a little bit and then we'll say, okay, khalas, sami'na wa ata'na. And that's great, alhamdulillah. When you go to academia, they don't have that red line. And they're going to
pause that. When Dr. Qadhi says that Muslims are pressed a little bit and then they sami'na wa ata'na, I think he made a mistake there. Okay, respectfully, he made a mistake there. Okay, Muslims just don't say sami'na wa ata'na. Muslims have studied our Qur'an. Our scholars have written books on qira'at, detailed books on qira'at. Okay, they have studied this. Imam al-Jazri, I gave you an example, Imam al-Jazri. Okay, go and look at his works and see what he has to say on the qira'at and other scholars. Okay, so it's not just we receive something and we submit to it blindly. No, scholars study. They write lengthy works. They are all available in Arabic. And Orientalists and Western scholars, they are still studying those sciences. And to say the least, I would like to mention this. A lot of these Orientalists actually haven't studied in a lot of depth. Okay, they keep coming up with these new theories. The epistemology of Western scholars, the epistemological lens they use to study Islamic sources is different to the lens we use to study Islamic sources. Our epistemology and the epistemology of Western scholars is not the same. Our epistemology doesn't have to be the same as the epistemology of Western scholars. Epistemology is basically theory of knowledge. How you get to know things. In case people don't know what epistemology is, right? So, for example, I'll give you a very quick example. Western scholars, most of them, they doubt the veracity of hadith literature. Do we have to accept it? Do we have to take it from them? Are they our imams? Are they the ones who will decide for us what we can believe and what we can't believe? Now, more and more as they study Islamic literature, as they go along, as they are making progress in Islamic studies, they are supporting the traditional narrative of Islam. Even hadith, they are now confirming that hadith, okay, is an authentic, is a viable source of history. While in the 1970s and 80s, some of them were very skeptical. Okay, now that revisionist school is being abandoned by modern scholars. A lot of modern scholars are now actually writing works to support the traditional view of Islam when it comes to even hadith. Now, because Western scholars are raising questions about the veracity of hadith, do we leave our epistemology? Do we leave the works of, for example, all the muhaddithin of the past? Do we leave the books of Ilm al-Rijal? Do we, for example, ditch Imam Albani? Do we ditch Sheikh Albani? Do we ditch Imam al-Dhahabi? Do we abandon Ibn al-Hajar al-Asqalani? Do we abandon Imam Nawawi? Do we abandon Ibn Salah? All of these traditional giants who have written books on the science of hadith, just because some Western scholars cannot get their heads around Muslim epistemology, just because they're highly skeptical, just because they want to doubt everything, even their own birth, right? Do we start abandoning the sources of Islam? No, we defend them with solid evidence, physical and otherwise. And we have, wallahi, we have so much evidence, physical, empirical, okay, and otherwise, to support our sources. Let's go forward, inshallah, with the clip.
The emperor with no clothes. They're going to just point out, no, that doesn't make any sense. Well, that's not true, and this and that. And they'll bring issues, which I'm not going to mention explicitly, that you know are true because they're in your own books. They're not inventing anything new. They'll bring you riwayat, and they'll bring you athar, and then you add to that very well-known issues of, I don't even want to be explicit. Then you bring on top of that makhtutat, and then. And it's very clear to you every single...
Dr. Qadhi, if you don't want to be explicit, don't talk about this. If you talk about these things, the Dr. Qadhi keeps saying that I don't want to be explicit. I don't want to be explicit. If you don't want to be explicit, don't talk about these matters because you're confusing people out there. People don't know what you're talking about. I know what you're talking about. Okay, but people don't know, the awam, the masses don't know what you're talking about. So my request from Dr. Yasir Qadhi is that he needs to come out and needs to clarify more in detail as to what he was talking about exactly, for the people to understand, right? And we have done this 2 hours video explaining what we are talking about, and we have done our best to be as clear, as crystal clear as possible about the preservation of the Quran. That's how you need to come out and explain. Okay, there's no point of saying that there are reports there are reports. We know exactly what's there. We know exactly what's there, and we know how our scholars have explained all these reports. Okay, just because Western scholars cannot get their heads around these reports, and just because they cannot accept certain reports, okay, you know, Western scholars, they work in a very funny way. What we deem authentic, they will say no, it doesn't seem authentic. They will leave it, and then they will apply their own self-concocted criteria on Islamic sources, and they will bring something inauthentic from Islamic sources, and they will say this seems to be authentic, and we will go by that. This is how Western academics work. They don't go by our epistemology. They don't follow our boundaries, our limits of authenticity and inauthenticity of hadith or reports. They concoct their own ideas, their own standards, and they go by their own standards. Now, just because they do that, do we have to agree with them? No. We tell them we don't accept your standards, especially when they clash directly with our solid epistemology, Islamic epistemology. It's Islamic theory of the preservation of the Quran and the Hadith. And now, thankfully, as we have read the quotes, a lot of them are coming out and they're confirming the veracity of the Quran and the veracity of the Hadith literature. So Yasir Qadhi, Dr. Yasir Qadhi, respectfully, he is, I think, you know, he needs to come out and clarify more as to what he was talking about when he talks about Western scholarship. Western scholarship is not be all and do all, is it? Okay, Western scholarship has made major mistakes, and they keep changing. For example, very quickly, Joseph Schacht, he wrote a book, The Origins of the Mohammedan Jurisprudence, in the 60s, in the late 60s, I think. He wrote this book, The Origins of Mohammedan Jurisprudence. And in this book, he plagiarized a theory, or he developed the theory of Ignaz Goldziher. Ignaz Goldziher was a 19th century Jewish Orientalist from Austria who had traveled to Egypt. He studied in Al-Azhar with scholars, okay? And later on, he came up with his own theory that Hadith literature was forged in the name of the Prophet and was projected backwards. So people, to support their ideas later on in the 2nd and 3rd century, they came up with ideas, they came up with doctrines, okay, about Islam, and to support those doctrines, they would forge reports, they would forge information and then project it back to the Prophet. They would attribute it back to the Prophet via a fake chain of narration. This was his theory, which he took from a 19th century hostile Orientalist called Ignaz Goldziher. And then he put this theory forward in a new style, or in a new way, in his book, The Origins of Mohammedan Jurisprudence. You know, when that book came out, a lot of Western scholars in the West, they said, Islam is finished. Islam is finished, it's gone. There is no response to this book. We don't know how Muslims will respond to it. Okay, Islam is debunked. Islamic literature is debunked. The Hadith literature is debunked. Islamic jurisprudence is debunked. When this book came out, check this out. Not long after that, one of our scholars who was competent in the English language, Sheikh Muhammad Mustafa Al-Azami, the same man who wrote the history of the Quranic text, okay, he wrote a rebuttal to Schacht, Joseph Schacht. And the rebuttal was titled, On the Origins, on Schacht's. This is the title of Muhammad Al-Azami, Sheikh Mustafa Al-Azami's book. This was the title, On Schacht's Origins of Muhammadan Jurisprudence. In this book, he pulled the rug from Schacht's feet. Wallahi. Yeah, he showed childish mistakes he made in the Arabic language, basic mistakes in reading the Hadith literature and contextualizing it and even understanding the context. And then he showed in this book how erroneous Schacht's theory was. He completely debunked it, and Joseph Schacht became a laughing stock after the refutation of Sheikh Mohammed Mustafa Al-Azmi. This is the reality of many Western scholars. Many Western, I'm not saying all of them, okay? They go and read certain books superficially. You know, PhDs are very narrow. PhDs do not give you a wide scope. They do not give you wide knowledge of, for example, even the science of hadith. It's a vast science. PhD doctors trained from Western institutions, they are nothing in comparison to our muhaddithin. I repeat, PhD doctors, even in the science of hadith, trained in Western institutions. Why am I saying this? Because their studies are very narrow on a certain point. They only study a very narrow certain point, right? Muhaddithin, they memorize chunky volumes. They memorize names. They memorize histories of men narrating reports. They know inside out the history of the hadith literature and how it was preserved and how it was transmitted. Okay, PhD doctors, in comparison to our muhaddithin, are nothing. Nothing. Okay, so that's why when Dr. Yasir Qadhi is giving too much credence to Western scholarship and Western scholars and the questions they're raising, okay, you know, I don't accept that. I'm sorry to say this. I had to talk about it. Let's move on.
Okay. So Adnan bhai, just to make you aware, we're closing in on we're over 2 hours now. So inshallah.
Yeah, we're gonna finish very soon.
That's fine. I just wanted to point just to remind you, inshallah, but take your time.
Yeah.
Very advanced student and specialist, that the standard narrative has holes in it. That's what I'm going to say. The standard narrative does not answer some very pressing questions. These are not within the Western.
Here, Dr. Yasir Qadhi is talking about Western academics saying that the standard narrative, okay, on the relationship between ahruf and the qira'at has holes in it. Okay. He's talking about Western scholarship. He's not talking about Muslim scholars. We have enough information to understand and to know what the Qur'an is. We have enough information on the qira'at and their transmission. We have enough information to know that ahruf were variations before the standardization of Uthman. Ahruf, they were variant readings of the Qur'an. There were different modes of the reading of the Qur'an before the Uthmanic standardization. Okay, and then Uthman standardized the text into the Qurayshi dialect for the future generations to read it. Okay, we have enough information to know that. So what Dr. Yasir Qadhi is talking about, as I understand him, I hope I understand him correctly, that he's saying, Western scholars are saying there are holes in the standard Islamic narrative about, you know, the relationship between ahruf and the qira'at. Okay, but guess what? Is this new? We have ulama, Islamic scholars, who have over 30 opinions about the nature of ahruf. The Muslim scholars are telling you that there is so much difference of opinion about the exact nature of the ahruf. Why do we need Western scholars to tell us this, and why do we need to be even worried about that?
Yeah.
Why do we, just because Western scholars are saying that we do not have enough information about the ahruf, okay, so what? Do we have the physical copies of the Quran from Uthman's time, from the time of the Prophet ﷺ? The answer is yes. We have the exact physical copies of the Quran from the life of the Prophet, from the life of Uthman, from the life of the other companions of the Prophet. We have physical copies we can look at, we can read, we can do a comparison between this copy and those copies, and it's exactly the same. So how does it have any bearing on the text of the Quran? What he's talking about is the nature of ahruf. What ahruf were actually like. Okay, just because ahruf were not preserved, okay, or ahruf were basically the text of the Quran was brought down to the Qurayshi dialect. Okay, the nature of the pre-Uthmanic text, you know, scholars have many opinions about it, as I stated early. Some say it were spellings, Some say it was about the order of the the words in verses, not the order of verses, the words within a particular verse, the order of words in a particular verse. For example, the variations are about plural and singular. The variations are about feminine and masculine wording. Okay, so these are slight variations to make the text convenient for the Arab tribes and their dialects. Okay, they were there. Okay, the exact nature of these variations, scholars differ.
Yeah,
scholars of Islam differ. So if the Western scholars are calling them holes in our narrative, let them call it holes. Who cares? Who cares? Are they holes? No, they're not holes. We have more than enough information to know what the Quran is.
Yes.
So if you ask me what to write in a blank notebook, if I was asked to write the Quran, I would write that Quran we saw on the screen. Period.
And I think one of the things you've really established very clearly today, Adnan, is that just because there are different opinions in regards to the ahruf, it has no logical bearing on the preservation of the Quran, on the Quran.
No. Okay, let me state this is a very good point. Thank you for raising that point. Just because there were variations, God revealed variations. Let me clarify. Let me state this very, very clearly, categorically. We will, inshallah, use this video once and for all to deal with these matters. God revealed variations in the pre-Uthmanic text. Allah revealed the variations. Allah revealed the ahruf. Allah revealed 7 different modes and styles of reading the Quran to accommodate the different styles of the Arabs, the different styles of speaking, the different speech in the Arabic language of the Arabs. To accommodate that, Allah revealed 7 different modes to the Prophet. Okay, those variations have no bearing whatsoever on the text of the Quran. I repeat,
that's a key.
Those variations have no bearing whatsoever on the text of the Quran. Okay, because what is the text of the Quran coming from the Prophet and his companions? What is it? Put it on the screen again.
Let me bring it up.
Why we keep doing it, so people don't forget what we're talking about. You have it?
Yep. So
this is what we are talking about. This is exactly what we are talking about. This is what we're talking about. The variations in ahruf, the different styles of the Arabs reading the Quran before the days of Uthman, or before the recension, the standardization of Uthman, has no bearing on this particular text, which comes from the life of the Prophet ﷺ and his companions. Okay, and the qira'at, okay, the different readings, okay, variant readings of the Quran have no bearing on this text of the Quran, which is physically available to us today from the 1st century CE, 1st century of Islam and 7th century CE. Okay, so from the life of the Prophet of Islam.
As we're going into such detail, I think if you can take a few minutes to clarify now, one thing we've established: the text is clear cut. We've done
this is the consonantal ductus.
Yeah.
What we see on the screen is the consonantal structure of the Quran, of the text.
Yeah.
This is the physical reality of the Quran. How it is read is another science which is dealt with by the qira'at, the science of qira'at.
Yeah.
Okay. So this is read is a different science. Yeah.
So talking about that science, I know we don't have time to go into detail now. We're already at almost 2.5 hours.
Yeah.
But when we talk about the different qira'at, the different readings that we have, Hafs and Warsh being the predominant in the world that most Muslims are aware of, right? That we read and recite in the Mus'haf that we have that's printed.
Yeah.
How did they arrive to us in a very simple, quick way, if you can?
The oral transmission of Hafs and Warsh, and it goes back directly to the companions of the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ, how they read the Quran, okay, and how they pronounce certain words, okay, and these pronunciations were delivered to the future generations, and the chains are uninterrupted. The chain of transmission up to our day, okay, is the chains are uninterrupted, going back to the companions of the Prophet of Islam, people like Abdullah bin Masud, people like Ali bin Abi Talib, people like Ubay bin Ka'b, okay, people like Zayd bin Thabit, okay. These chains go back to these companions who not only wrote down the Quran physically, they taught how to read it as well. This is how you pronounce certain words. Brother Imran, we have instructions on how to prolong a word. How to prolong a word. You know, when we read غَيْرِ الْمَغْضُوبِ عَلَيْهِمْ وَلَا الضَّالِّينَ. Even this has been transmitted to us from the companions. This length. Okay, this length. Okay, how we pronounce this. Okay, if I was to read that copy from the 1st century, we saw on the screen, okay, I would read wala dhalin, wala dhalin. I would read it like that. Okay, that's the physical reading of it, but the oral delivery of it has also been preserved. That's where the variations are. That's where the variations are, because scholars of the Quran, of course, they, for example, there are 8 differences between Warsh and Hafs. Slight differences, like the one I gave you earlier, Malik and Malik. Malik and Malik. Malik and Malik. This is regarded as a variation between Hafs and Warsh. Allahu Akbar. Okay, so the variations of that, the reading are so tiny that they don't affect, the text is there, the text is uniform in front of you, right? So that's it. This is what I wanted to clarify. Let's move on to the rest of Dr. Yasir Qadhi's treatment of this, and go ahead, please.
Academy, that they're bringing forth issues. Their level of now knowledge is leaps and bounds above what it used to be, 100 years ago. What is happening in the last few years is not me anymore. It's the Western academics. These problems are now becoming mainstream. And by and large, our ulama in the Eastern world are not aware, by and large, of what's going on in the Western side of things. And they're not...
Okay, pause there, please. Dr. Yasir Qadhi is simply, I'm not going to say he's confused, he's a learned man. And I wish he was challenged on this by Mohammed Hijab, okay? When he says our scholarship is unaware, I don't know what he's talking about. Wallahi, there are chunky volumes written on Qur'an. And Western scholars are miskeens. They are relying upon information that comes from our scholars. Where are Western scholars getting information from? Are they digging? Do they have these Indiana Jones hats on, and they go to the Middle East and they start digging in the mountains and the caves, and they're finding new texts and new books, and they're basing their theories on those? No. All what is coming from Western scholars is based upon entirely from our scholars, from the Arabic works written by our scholars in the classical period and in the modern period. I don't know what Dr. Yasir Qadhi is talking about, that our scholars are not aware of these problems. They are aware of every single problem, if you want to call it a problem. Okay, the questions Western or Orientalists are raising about the exact nature of, for example, the ahruf, okay, are not new questions. They are known to the scholars of Islam. They are the ones who transmitted these questions and these opinions, right? As I said, they have no bearing on the text of the Quran, the physical text, the morphology, the consonantal ductus, the consonantal skeleton of the words of the Quran, as we saw on the screen. Okay, let's go. Let's go.
That was the end of the video.
That's the end of the video. That's it, brothers and sisters. We have gone on for 2 hours, 20 minutes. We thought we're going to do it in half an hour, but as you know how passionate myself and Brother Imran are about this topic, we wanted to deal with this topic once and for all. I hope we have not left any question, any major question, that we didn't address. Alhamdulillah, we have addressed most major questions, and we will continue to do so in the future. I will make a shorter video, inshallah, in the future, which will be uploaded on my channel, as to how we can read a 1st century Quran from the life of the Prophet ﷺ, so that people can know what we have from the life of the Prophet and from the 1st century of Islam, and how these Christian missionaries and Islamophobes are a bunch of liars when they say the Quran is not preserved. What are you talking about? It's like saying the sun doesn't exist. The sun does not exist. They are blind. They are blinded by hatred. They are blinded by agenda. They are blinded by evil intentions. They have evil intents. Some of these people They simply lie because they are paid money to lie. They know they're lying, but and why they're lying is because they're making money. Islamophobia is a multi-million dollars industry. A lot of people are getting rich by it. So why not these Christian missionaries? Why not? They have jumped on the bandwagon, and they are a bunch of liars. Even Christians know they are a bunch of liars. So please keep in mind the first century Quran we read from. It comes from the life of the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, and his companions, according to the scholarly opinion and radiocarbon dating. Then what we talked about, when it comes to the origin and the nature of the ahruf, okay, it has been discussed. Then Western scholarly quotes on the preservation of the Quran and the Uthmanic standardization of the text, and whether what we have in this modern copy today is exactly what can be found in the first century's copies of the Quran, and a list of those Qur'ans from the first century and their pictures can be found on Islamic-awareness.org. If you go to the Quran section and click the manuscript section, you will see a lot more detailed study. Thank you so much for being with us, Brother Imran. Jazakallah khair, and I hope we have done justice to the topic somewhat. We cannot do justice to the topic because it's such a vast topic, but we have done somewhat. We have tried to cover to the best of our abilities. We are students, we are still learning, and if we have made any mistakes, my brothers and sisters, please forgive us. That was not our intent. Our intention is to defend the Quran, defend the veracity of Islam, defend Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and his deen. Okay, that was the intention. So if we made a mistake, if we made an error in any shape or form, please forgive us. Do not hold it against us and correct us, and we will stand corrected. We will stand corrected. Okay, we gave evidence for every single thing we talked about. Okay, so jazakumullah khair.